anyway, the question was posed about what other cities in Arkansas do, what do they use the International Property Maintenance Code? Before we get there, I want to kind of dive in and look at what we have in place right now in Jonesboro. This is our nuisance properties unlawful. This is part of what we use for condemnation. And you can read that, but basically what it's saying is that the city council is the governing body that declares a property to be a nuisance. Okay. I will have handouts of all this for next time for your folder. Basically, the next part of that is the condemnation for abatement. And it says any such house, building, or structure, and what it's talking about is that was declared a nuisance, which is found to be declared to be a nuisance by resolution of the city council, will be condemned to ensure the repair, rehabilitation, securing, or raising or removal of that property. Okay, so the provisions that we have now kind of have something that says the city council can order property be repaired if they declare it a nuisance. The next section talks about the abatement of the owner, that they're required, if the property is declared to be a nuisance, they're required to get the permits to repair it, secure, raise, remove, or otherwise abate the nuisance within 30 days. Okay. So we have a process that, loosely translated, could be used to address property. Now, there's some pitfalls with that. Number one is we don't have specific things that say what it is to be a nuisance. So right now, the way the process works is Tim Renshaw, Chief Building Official, will inspect the property to see if it's structurally sound. And that is kind of the threshold of what the city council looks at to be declared a nuisance. We don't have anything, we don't have any enumerated clauses that say, well, if this condition exists or that condition exists, you could declare it to be a nuisance. So that, again, that is the reason we don't have those deficiencies. Plus, we already bring all the condemnations to the city council. We don't want to come to the city council with every issue because, again, government at that point grinds down to a halt. Sorry.
So Todd, how are these properties brought to your attention?
What?
How are these properties under these statutes?
Usually we get either complaints about the property from neighbors. We go out and during normal business, one of our code officers, one of his officers, police officers, sanitation, anybody that sees a house, we got a call about one for code enforcement violations from animal control yesterday. So other people in the city will see these houses and say, hey, this house looks horrible. Or we'll get calls from neighbors saying, hey, this house is in terrible shape. So at that point, then Ronnie, now Mike Tyner, and Mr. Renshaw will go out and do an inspection on the house to see if it's structurally sound and a candidate for something to be condemned. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
So the city then owns that property?
No.
Once condemned?
If a property gets condemned, once the city council declares it to be a nuisance and condemns a property, what we do is we give notice to the owner, and they have 30 days to secure permits to start the rehab renovation or take it down. If they don't secure those permits within 30 days, then we move forward with, and what we've done is remove the property. We've not had any because the next section is abatement by city, and the city could actually go in there and repair a property. We've never done that. What we've done each and every time that we've had to do it has been we've removed it. Once we remove the property, then we file a lien against the real estate of the property. So if it gets sold, then the city recoups those.
The cost to raise it?
Yes.
The inspection process, kind of walk us through that. I mean,
Officer Tyner and myself will, usually if it gets to this point, the house is open. It's either a blighted area and children are running in and out. It's either unsafe or obviously unsightly. We enter the home, basically just do a visual inspection of the home, take pictures of it while we're there for evidence. I have a checklist that I go through that I fill out for each inspection. At the bottom of it, it states, is this house, is it an emergency? You know, at that point, I either yes or no. I mean, inspection is done by myself.
Okay.
Pretty simple. You know, it's either structurally sound or it's not.
Most of,
What makes it structurally sound?
Either, you know, the roof could possibly be dilapidated enough that water is coming in and causing the ceiling and stuff to fall in. You know, that stuff can be repaired if you know, if the owner so chooses to do so. The flooring, either if it's on piers, you know, the flooring would be unstable, be falling in, unsafe. The wood around the windows, everything rotted, you know, stuff like that. As well as the plumbing and electrical. We did as well, the code and obviously what the cost would be. You know, we kind of figured that as well. Would it be feasible to rehab it? That's one of the things that the owner usually wants to know when they get the report. They will usually make a determination at that point if it's something they want to try to repair, or if they will go ahead and let it be, you know, the demolition process.
Tim, could we get a copy of that check sheet to us sometime next few weeks so we can kind of see what that looks
Sure.
like?
Sure.
what you're talking about here is really uninhabited, abandoned properties
Right,
at this point,
right.
right?
And even, you know, even at that point, there's always the option for someone to come along and, you know, you could sell it. If it was one of your properties, it could still be for sale. You still have 30 days to do something. You could sell it.
Doesn't prevent it from being sold. The condemnation doesn't prevent it from being sold?
No, you still have 30 days to you could sell it, someone else could get permits to have it, you know, rehabbed or whatever the case may be. Usually when it gets to that point, the property is more valuable without the house on it.
Right.
The route it goes.
There was one I was thinking of on Southbrook last year that was, had been just, ceilings were falling in a good neighborhood. And I remember it went to condemnation and the lady showed up there to try to stop it, but claimed she hadn't gotten notices, and I think y'all documented that she did have notices on it.
Yeah, that's the part that used to be Ronnie, now Michael Tyner.
Right.
He gives all the notifications, everything that's required. I generally just do the inspection part.
Right. Well, that one got sold, I think, and now it's rehabbed and retailed, sold again. So it was in a good neighborhood, good bones, but it had roof problems. And
Down so far, you know, that's the plus side. If it gets sold, someone either rehabs it or rebuilds.
So,
Something to note quickly on, so far since I've been in the position I've been in, we've only condemned 2 properties that were being occupied at the time. They were in horrible shape, one on Bridge and one on Patrick. They were in terrible shape. The razor's edge of doing a condemnation on a house that's occupied is we don't want to tear down somebody's house that they're living in. The 2 cases that we're talking about were emergent cases. They were to the point that any day, another day staying in that house was asking for trouble. So again, to use the condemnation is a broadsword. It's not a scalpel. And so we don't want to condemn a house that somebody's living in and then all of a sudden tear it down and they don't have a place to go. The one on Bridge Street, we actually worked with Grants, who worked with somebody else to get them an apartment, an affordable apartment. And I think the lady on Patrick Street moved to live with somebody else. Somebody, was there another question?
I just had two questions. One question is, so from the point that you decide something's going to be a nuisance or condemned, is that decision, as I understand, is solely rest among your department? You just make that decision?
No, it is.
You bring it to the city council and then they approve it?
Right.
Okay. So from that point, they have 30 days to get permits?
Once it's condemned, the process starts when they inspect it. We contact the owner, send them a copy of the inspection report, give them the opportunity to get permits in place to do something long before it ever goes to.
So the city council action is the last step? It's over at that point, almost, yeah. So the real question that I had is, so once you've determined a property is moving toward condemnation, in your experience, and Todd, maybe more you than, I don't know how much y'all have had this, how long does it take someone to institute repairs? And I bring the question up because it's sort of like when people owe you money, you send them the first notice, they send you $5, it resets the system. So you can get building permits, but you don't necessarily have to do anything with them. And does that stop the process? Is the timeline still run? Do you follow what I'm asking?
Once we notify them that, because what we want is we want to notify them that they have the structure that's in disrepair and possibly going to be condemned. What we want is for them to get permits and remove it or repair it without having to take up any more of anybody else's time or money. If they go get permits at that point, we won't move forward until either the renovation or repair is done or those permits expire and the work's not been complete. Now, Tim has the prerogative, and in several cases somebody shows progress and then kind of slows down to say, okay, we'll reissue the permit. He also has the prerogative at some point when they just finally they try to reissue the permit, they're not doing anything, to say, okay, we're not issuing you another permit.
So how long do the permits last?
6 months.
So basically, they could get permits, don't do anything for 6 months, do a little bit of work, convince somebody to renew the permit, and sort of, in a sense, game the system.
They can be dragged out for a couple of years, yes.
Okay.
So again, obviously, there are some problems with trying to use the condemnation process as the mechanism for a property maintenance code. Moving on, cities that actually use the property maintenance code, international property maintenance code. We talked about Fort Smith adopted the international property maintenance code with amendments. Russellville also adopted the international property maintenance code with amendments. Little Rock did the same thing. I know we had some discussion about Little Rock. I actually found I found the ordinance where they adopted the 2006, I think, 2009. Was there a 2009 version? 2006 or 2009.
6 is what I saw, but
International Property Maintenance Code, and Bryant just adopted the code. Matter of fact, on their website, looking at their codes, you see the cover of the International Property Maintenance.
Why are we not working with the 15 code rather than the 12 code?
When we started this is where it was. I mean, this is the code that we had. The 2012. Let me grab this. We'll talk about this later too. The 2012 International Property Maintenance Code is parallel to the 2012 Residential Code, which is the 2012 Arkansas Fire Prevention Code. It takes Arkansas 2 years or so to adopt the new code. So right now, Arkansas won't be using the 2015 building code, fire prevention code, until probably 2 to 3 years from now. Because these run parallel, we wanted to look at the same international code that parallels
What you
the
have.
two codes. Does that make sense?
So when the 2015, I think you said, building code is adopted by the state, does the city council have to take any action in regards to that, or is it done like you have suggested before in reference?
It should be done in reference. However, what Arkansas does with the Arkansas Fire Prevention Code, by taking the International Building Code and basically changing things to address Arkansas, we would actually have to sit down, we would want to sit down and look to see any changes that they made. And you'll see later on in some of the references, the International Property Maintenance Code references the International Building Code. Some of the changes that we're going to recommend that you guys propose changes that reference from International Building Code to the Arkansas Fire Prevention Code. So we would still have to go back and make sure that any recommendations for change or any amendments still fit in the right place, basically. So that's something that we would have to do as staff and bring forward to the city council. I don't know that it would require further action on their part, other than to change some of the amendments to make sure they fit in the right spot, basically. All right. Any questions, any other questions about that? All right, so.
I'm sorry, Todd.
Yeah.
I have one other question. So you mentioned I think 4 communities that have adopted some form of this maintenance code.
They adopted the International Property.
One adopted it, one amended it.
Right.
Fort Smith amended it. North Little Rock rewrote it, if I remember.
No, North Little, and we'll talk about North Little Rock.
Okay, but Little Rock adopted it in its entirety.
They adopted it, and I think they made amendments to it.
Here's my question then. I've been reading some things about copyright issues. What is the cost to the city to interact with the International Building Code people in Alabama? I mean, are there copyright fees? Does it cost the city more? Does it cost the city less if you amend this, if you wordsmith the code, in other words, so it wasn't a copyright violation just to reproduce it?
I do not know.
Okay, so there's some motive. The reason I asked the question, there must be a motivation. There's several other communities in the state and around the country who have wordsmithed it, if you will,
We're going to look.
for a reason. And you don't know the reason either.
I have suspicion on the reason, and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
But as far as a benefit, I don't know that we have any copyright fees, do we?
We are a governmental member as a municipality. We are members of the ICC, International Code Council, and there is a fee for that yearly that the city pays. We can call them at any time for any advice, any interpretations, anything of that nature. We are a governmental member of the ICC.
So there's no definite problem with copyright. If you're paying to buy this already, you can do what you want with it, or? That was some of what I was hearing, earlier, a month or so ago, that maybe we can't do that.
I think it would be questionable to just copy and paste it.
Okay.
And like I said, I think the direction will come a little bit clearer with the next few slides.
Okay.
So those 4 cities adopted the International Property Maintenance Code. Some other cities, these cities, Bentonville, Sherwood, Jackson, Springdale, Benton, Hot Springs, all adopted their own code that are similar to the International Property Maintenance. And that's what we look at the similarities to those. So the first thing you see is in 2012, I actually, looking at their codes and looking at the International Property Maintenance Codes, they appear, some of these 4 or these 3 appear identical. I did not go through line by line to see if they changed anything. But I wanted to look at a couple different more obscure codes, one of them dealing with occupancy limitations and what the definition of a habitable room. And you can look at the definition under IPMC on 404.2, minimum room widths. It says a habitable room other than a kitchen shall be a minimum of 7 feet or 2,134 millimeters in any direction. Kitchens shall have a minimum clear passageway of 3 feet, 914 millimeters between counterfronts and appliances, counterfronts and walls. You can look at what Benton, Sherwood, and Springdale have in their own code that they adopted. And I don't see any difference.
You just left out words.
Again, I didn't go through their entire codes with the International Property Maintenance Code to see if they changed a few subtle things to make it applicable to them. But it's obviously that they use the International Property Maintenance Code as their template, if not copy and paste it. The other ones, Benton specifically, they're also in, and we'll see it maybe tonight, maybe next time, in occupancy limitations, there's a section on minimum room size, what the minimum room size is for occupancy. The IPMC is on the left. Benton, whose code was adopted in 1978, originally. You can look at the language of their code and see the similarity of it. Now, the only thing that I can conclude is that before the International Property Maintenance Code was developed was the Southern Building Code, and those both came from that same direction. Benton didn't have the specific code we mentioned earlier, but again, they have this one, which has basically the footprints of the Southern Building Code, which again is tied to the International Building Code, International Maintenance Code. Jacksonville's the same way. The only difference between Jacksonville and Benton were the square foot for more than one person in a room. Hot Springs was a little bit different. Hot Springs doesn't address occupancy limits, and their code was for residential only. But that habitable space, talking about the ceiling height, again, that's in the same section, 404.3, which has to do with occupancy limits. It baffled me why Hot Springs had that requirement in there, but they didn't address occupancy limits at all. But obviously, you can see the similarity between the International Property Maintenance Code and what Hot Springs did. So all those communities that we've mentioned so far either adopted the International Property Maintenance Code, used the Southern Building Code, or the International Property Maintenance Code as a template for their code. We have other cities that have other codes. The first one being Pine Bluff. I know we have somebody with Pine Bluff ties in the room. I don't want to talk bad about Pine Bluff. Pine Bluff's actually called us for help with code enforcement and condemnation. So it kind of surprised me to look when I saw that they actually adopted the residential code. Now, the International Residential Code is that one. Okay, it's the Arkansas Fire Prevention Code without the changes. But they actually, you can see they adopted that International Residential Code as there is hereby adopted for the city the Property Maintenance Code. Okay, so Pine Bluff actually has a Property Maintenance Code. Texarkana similarly has the Standard Housing Code adopted. You can look down I believe it's close to the end where it says, they have the number of copies herein, the provisions therein shall be controlling in the use, maintenance, and occupancy of all dwelling units and or structures. So Texarkana has a property maintenance code as well. North Little Rock, we talked about them. Technically, what they did was adopted the standard building code and then kind of wordsmith their own code from there. Hope has a property maintenance code. This is, I think, Hope's entire code. It is very vague and general, but it is property owner shall maintain all structures intended for occupancy in a neat and orderly appearance and in compliance with the City of Hope Land Development Code. You can see some of the things that they actually talked about, the collapse shall remove, have partially collapsed shall remove and repairs made. peeling paint and scraping surfaces reclaimed. So that's Hope's take on a property maintenance code. Fayetteville, and I know that's a whole bunch there, but Fayetteville took a little different take on it. If you look at that ordinance at the top, you'll see it's similar to ours. It's talking about property nuisance, and then it's unlawful for a person having charge or possession of your property to maintain it in such a manner that is determined by the city after due process hearing that the property nuisance exists upon the property. So they're actually going to the city, is declaring that a nuisance, and what they did was enumerated out what it means to be a nuisance. Okay, so number 12 is dilapidated exterior, dilapidated roof coverings, dilapidated or unfinished exterior walls coverings, broken or missing doors and or windows. So that was Fayetteville's take on how they chose to do a property maintenance code. And then we have cities with no property maintenance code. Now, granted, every one of these cities, most of these cities, had something to deal with the exterior, the premises, tall grass, inoperable vehicles. Those were all pretty standard ordinances. But as far as dealing with the structure itself, they either had something similar to what our condemnation process is, or they didn't have anything. You see those: Rogers, El Dorado, Batesville, Cabot, Irrigal, West Memphis, Conway, Searcy, Blytheville, and Jonesboro.
Every one of these has an exterior property maintenance, or Hot Springs is the only one?
What Hot Springs has is an exterior property maintenance code, but when you read it, it only talks about grass and inoperable vehicles and appliances and junk. It's basically the same thing that we have. I didn't want you guys to get confused. Somebody look up Hot Springs Village, rather. Somebody look up Hot Springs Village and say, well, they have an external property maintenance code. Well, what they have is not talking about the external of a structure, but just outside of the property. I also wanted to go ahead and look at cities that surround Arkansas that we either go to, hear about in the area. Jackson, Tennessee has adopted the International Property Maintenance Code. Dyersburg, Tennessee adopted their own code, and I looked at the same reference, and that should all look pretty familiar to you. That they have used the International Property Maintenance Code. Poplar Bluff, Missouri, I couldn't find any information about them. Memphis, Tennessee has a property maintenance code, and you can look at the wording there, and that 70 square feet per room area and 50 square feet for each other person in the room. That's going to look pretty familiar with it for you. And again, I believe that goes back to the Southern Building Code. And Tupelo, Mississippi, I had to throw Mississippi in there for you, but Tupelo, Mississippi adopted the International Property Maintenance Code. Okay, that's the long way to answer who in Arkansas uses the International Property Maintenance Code. Any property maintenance code has written their own. Now, for you guys, it's going to be the direction. What direction do we want to go? As I see it, other than not doing anything, we can look at the proposed ordinance that's out there now to adopt the International Property Maintenance Code to address only multifamily structures. That is the ordinance that has been read once and was held. Again, we talked about there was planned to be a recommendation to adopt the International Property Maintenance Code as a whole to apply it to all structures and premises, adopt the International Property Maintenance Code with amendments to create the Jonesboro Property Maintenance Code, which is really what I suspect these other agencies did, is that they adopted the International Code, made amendments, and created what was left from it as their own code, which is why the wording all looks the same. To answer the copyright question, I believe if we go that route, we would be exempt from any of the copyright violations because we adopted the International Property Maintenance Code. Sir? Absolutely.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to also point out I had worked on, I think, a similar code to this in Ohio when I was working in Ohio. The way the document is set up, and I think you all have your manuals, right before the table of contents is the cover ordinance or legislation that would make this legal in Jonesboro. And I think by evidence of that, by them giving us a sample of that, that is our okay or go ahead to adopt the entire document with the insertions or deletions as that cover ordinance. So I think that might be an additional approach to the fear of us, I guess, violating copyrights, is to use the ordinance as a cover adoption of the property maintenance code with these sections deleted or amended or modified. So that's right before the table of contents, and I just thought that would be.
Todd, in all your research, is there one city that you like their code that fits what you're trying or what we're trying to do?
I did not look, we looked at Fort Smith because they enumerated all the amendments that they had. And so what we sat down to do when we started looking at this is I wanted to look at every amendment that they did and try to understand why they did it. Most of them are the references to the International Building Code or the International Mechanical Code, and because Fort Smith is like us, they adopted the Arkansas Fire Prevention Code 1, 2, and 3. They changed those references. Most of what they changed was that, but there was a few other small changes that they made that as we go through this, some of it made sense. There's a couple ones I didn't really understand why they changed what they changed. And so rather than try to figure out, call them and ask them why they changed it, to actually look at it for ourselves.
I mean, I looked at it. That was the only one that I really went online and looked at. It looked pretty like it was covering everything pretty good. Now, again, there was a lot of stuff in there that I didn't know what they were talking about either, but it looked pretty organized and pretty detailed for the most part. And that's why I didn't know whether or not.
Now, and again, I think if I were to sit down and take, say, Springdale that adopted their own code, but the verbiage was identical to the International Property Maintenance Code, I think if I were to sit down side by side, I would see those same changes or similar changes that they made. It was just, from a time frame standpoint, that was not practical. Yeah. But again, the other option would be for us to write our own code or wordsmith it, Dr. Warren, our own code. That decision, which direction we go in, is your direction, is your decision. I would add a couple things. You can choose at the end of this process that you do want to recommend that the city doesn't adopt anything. That'll be your prerogative. But to work our way through this, we need to choose one of these directions, because that's going to determine basically the work that we do as we go through this. Even if you decide as a committee that you want to try to work on writing our own code, from reading the International Property Maintenance Code, it is a good comparison to what is being done and how it's being applied. I mean, it's a well-written document. Whether or not you agree with everything in it, it's a well-made document and would suffice very well as a comparison. So if we talked about our recommendation, and the staff recommendation would be that we adopt the International Property Maintenance Code with amendments that we recommend to create a Jonesboro Property Maintenance Code. At the end of the day, what we would have in Municode, in our ordinance, would be the Jonesboro Property Maintenance Code. It would be the International Property Maintenance Code with the any changes that we make to be the Jonesboro Property Maintenance Code. So that would be our recommendation, but you guys will have to decide what direction we head.
I just wanted to say, I did some research online just about cities just in the southeast in general that had adopted it, and there are several. And if you go to like a state, like for instance, Alabama, and put in ICC, you can go and it lists every community that has adopted it, and there's some that have adopted it since that list was put out. And so it's not, it seems kind of limited when you just look at Arkansas or just right in our little circle, but there's a lot of places that have adopted it, and some that I'm familiar with. The community my son lives in right now is Auburn, Alabama, and they just adopted it. And they have a very similar demographic to us. It's except the university is much larger, but they started out a lot like us, and it's a very pleasant little city, and I see them trying to do the same things that we're trying to do, is just get rid of some blight, keep some landlords that are not good players accountable, and providing appropriate housing for people, and just making our city take another step into this century. So I like that recommendation of taking it, what is already a proven document, and adding what we need to that fits our community the best.
Yes.
Changing the subject just slightly, you brought up the what's out there now, what the city council has on the table, and that it would seem to me that maybe having listened to that and heard some comment from some of the legal people, that wasn't exactly written in a good way. Would that be an accurate statement?
What was it?
The present proposed ordinance and we hadn't yet seen a real amendment to it. We just heard a rumor of that. I mean, would it be appropriate just to discount that completely and just start from scratch and do it right? If there's legal issues with that wording, why do we even want to consider that?
If we look at direction of only applying the International Property Maintenance Code to multifamily, then there would be some work that would have to be done, I believe, to that amendment to basically make it a little more solid, shore it up.
Well, it may not be the appropriate time for this. I don't know how you want to run this, but I'll just make a comment to that. In my personal feeling, and the people that I've talked to, my goal, and Teresa put it very well, just to have a beautiful city, a nice city. If you pick on it, maybe that's a bad word, if you isolate the code just for multifamily housing, one, you're putting an unfair burden on one group of people, if you will, and not the community. And, you know, if we're all in this together as a community and it's a positive thing, you get a lot of synergism and a lot of energy if everybody's under the same guidelines. That's my feeling. And so I really oppose picking out a group of people and, if you will, challenging them to do something that you aren't making us all think about. I mean, it's just out of sheer fairness, if nothing else. But I guess the bigger question was, if that's written in such a way that it's not got the right legalese, just start with a new document or a new plan. And I looked through the notebook and noticed that you put in the partial notes from the previous committee, and it looked like that, in a sense, they were on the right path. They just never finished their work, is the way I read those notes. Maybe I misread those, but that's what I got from it. But I would like to see us have a crisp, I guess, a crisp working plan of how we wanted to do this so that we're efficient, we cover all the bases, we respect all the opinions, and I just don't see any value in starting with things that are sort of partial. That's just my personal comment.
Why don't we go back to the previous slide and eliminate the options that we don't like
Todd, on
as a committee?
the previous committee, really, as far as I remember, I was on that committee, but I thought on the thing we really liked was the penalties, the fines, as far as putting together.
Administration.
We talked a little bit about it last time, was that the administration part of it, because we're trying to cut and paste or create our own, the administration, even though it's in there, it was not, we had some conflicts there with the administration. We didn't talk about how it would be administered as far as like an SOP. And then a downfall that we heard from talking to people is that we never considered anything on the inside.
Yeah, it was exterior only.
No, I'll second what Dr. Bob said about making it fair.
Everybody.
If you go back and you ask Tim about his complaints, he probably doesn't have as many multifamilies as he does personal owned property or property that is leased property. I would dare to say he doesn't have near as many multifamily as he does other residential complaints. So if it's complaint driven, you may be by just doing it multifamily, you're probably eliminating a whole lot of things that have issues to start with. So fair to everybody, that puts everybody, that levels the playing field. So I second and agree with that as it's written right now, that's going to stir up a lot of trouble.
Okay. Let's go this way. By show of hands, who wants to try to adopt the International Property Maintenance Code to be applied only to multifamily housing? No one. All right. I'm going to skip 2 and 3 for a reason.
Well, Todd, I would even amend what you said. Any code, it doesn't have to be this code, just any code, any set of guidelines, I think should be applicable to the whole city.
Anything we come up with ought to be that way.
Yes.
And I think rather than looking at it from the negative, and I recognize the comment about the crime, that's important, and it's a statistic, certainly, but I choose to look at this as a positive thing for the city. I think that it's not punitive. I think that there are many of us who respect Jonesboro in different ways. You know, Mary Ellen and I happen to like old houses and sidewalks and trees. Other people may like golf clubs or, whatever. But I guess the take-home message to it is that we have a beautiful city. We have lots of good areas. And I just think you look at it in a positive light and when you in this process, and this can be a very good thing for everybody sitting in this room. And I guess maybe I'm taking this a little too seriously, but I think we have a responsibility to our community, not just to the people who have business interests, but to the entire communities of Jonesboro to make this a nice city. We have Ms. Nelson, as part of our little West End group, and I think she says something like a happy city. I can't remember her exact quote, and I just think this can be a positive process. And that's how I'd like to see this committee operate in a positive light.
So again, so if we eliminated option 1, we're left with 2, 3, and 4. Now, looking at option 4, in taking on the endeavor of trying to write our own property maintenance code from scratch. Is there anybody that wants to take on that task? Show of hands.
Because after we adopt whatever we adopt, we're going to have the standard operating procedures in place, because I think that was a big hang-up of the community, was what were we going to do? And so I think that's going to be the more important thing that we're going to have to come up with from scratch. So if we start out with a document that's already been proven, it's going to be much better and a better use of our time than to do that.
If we're left with option 2, which is just to adopt the International Property Maintenance Code, or option 3, which is to adopt the code with recommendations for amendments, our process now becomes the same, which is work our way through this code. That is the process we will move into. We're not going to have a lot of time to get deep into it tonight because we still have to. Would it bother anybody to postpone adopting or appointing a chairman till the next committee? Does that bother anybody?
Good idea. No, it's a good idea.
And the reason I say that is because I'm not versed in all of Robert's rules of procedure.
Well, I just was about that. You just segued to my question. I think more importantly, and this is just again, you're going to find out I have an opinion. You know, surgeons are sometimes wrong, but we're never in doubt. So the question is this, what is the process? I think that's the question, and you just alluded to Robert's Rules of Order. What's the job description for the chair? What's their responsibilities? How much time will that take, et cetera? Thirdly, I just think it's really important that we have a template of how we're going to proceed rather than jumping right into the meat of the matter, so that we have a good way to make decisions. We have a fair way to make decisions. The other thing, and I think the mayor alluded to this, I heard this rumor. I wasn't here. I apologize to you guys last week. I had to be out of the state, but I heard the mayor mention a little something about we need to squash all the rumors. We don't need to let people take 3 lines out of here that meets their argument and leave the second part of the paragraph out of the thing. So I think it's important in the process that with a fiduciary responsibility we've been given, that it's our job to squash the rumors, to make sure that it's factual, make sure that we understand everything about it. And so to me, the first step is maybe, is it going to be Robert's Rules of Order? Is it going to be a process, or what's the chairman's duties, et cetera?
I will have all that for you the next time we meet. My intentions are to walk our way through the International Property and Maintenance Code in a way that is both logical and efficient. Again, we didn't know how much time we were going to have tonight to get into the meat, but I know from working from past experience and knowing you guys, the first point of contention, the hardest decision that we'll have to make about a property maintenance code is, are we going to cover the inside of the house? Are we going to cover anything on the inside of the house? There's already, I can see from facial expressions, everybody already has an idea or opinion about whether or not we should or we shouldn't. It makes no sense to start off kicking that can down the road, but just to take that part of it head on. So my intention is for us to look at the parts of this code that address the interior of a structure and postpone the decision of whether or not we look inside the house until after we've decided, if we look in the house, what would we want to cover? What affects health, safety, and welfare? How do you guys want to proceed or recommend with that? So it doesn't make sense to say we're not going to cover anything on the inside of the house and not look at it, but it also doesn't make sense to say we're going to cover the inside of the house and not take a thorough look at what we would and wouldn't cover. Yes.
I promise I won't say anything else after this. I feel like I've talked a lot.
I don't believe you, Dr. Ward.
Well, it's okay. None of my friends would either. So here's the issue that I would just throw out to some people, and you may find this helpful. There's a book called URI Getting to Yes. It's the Harvard Negotiation Project. And the premise of that whole little read is 24 pages. Get it at Barnes & Noble. It basically says just kind of what you were saying, and that is that if a group of people who think they have huge differences get together and they really look through something thoroughly and write down all the places they agree, what it really boils down to is very few things that are a contingent, if you will, and there are very few things that are deal breakers. I think you find out when people come together and they're forthright about it, that most people will find out they agree on 90% of everything. And that's kind of what this book shows you. It shows you how to work through. And so I think, and the analogy I was thinking about, when a patient, I'll have people all the time going, Doc, no matter what you say, I'm not going to do that. Wait a minute. Let's look through the whole illness. What do you need? What's the treatment? What can we do about it? And 9 times out of 10, they'll make an informed decision instead of a decision. And so I'm hearing you say, and I totally agree with you, I think it needs to be looked at in every facet, because I can promise you there's some things in the interior code that I probably am against, and as we all might be. But I don't know that because I hadn't had the opportunity to look at it closely.
That said, next meeting, hopefully we can get through in general requirements, section 305 and 306.
Or agreed that number 3 is our goal?
No, and
2 or 3.
2 or 3?
yeah, he lost me. Chapter 3 is the general provisions. Most of that has to do with the exterior. I would like to wait to look at that till, number one, we can actually maybe have the opportunity to go look at some structures that we drive by. So it doesn't make sense to tackle that now. And again, because we know that the interior part of it's going to be one of the areas that we want to scrutinize. Starting that off first when we're fresh, but section 305 and 306, if you would like to read over that.
It's our homework.
That's your homework. As well as chapter 4 talks about light, ventilation, and occupancy limits. Chapter 5 is plumbing fixtures and fixture requirements. And chapter 6 is mechanical and electrical requirements. So in your leisure time, because I know you all have as much as I do, it's been raining so we can't mow. If you can look over those, some of it is really hard to read. You need a slide rule and some of it's just difficult to read. But try to be familiar with those, and we can move through those. My intention is not to stand up here and read all those codes. My intention is for us to talk about what the codes actually mean and what they're, basically what the code is trying to govern. I don't think that we have time to get into the wordsmith of each thing. So if we say this section 305.11 is moving in this direction and you guys say, you know what, we think it should move in this direction, in between the meeting, I will get together with Tim, with our city attorney, and look and see how we need to word that to move in the direction that you want to go. Otherwise, we're going to be just bogged down with trying to figure out, is and was, and we'll be ground to a halt. So, yes.
And hopefully we'll have the checklist of the internal next week also.
I'd like to ask for some facts about complaints and what's your average, what's your most complained besides grass? When we're talking about exterior structures, that would be applicable to what we're looking to do right here. Something that you can't do anything about, but you get that complaint anyway, right? You know, I'd like to see if there's, and I'd really like to know if they're owner occupied or not. If there's a way to find that out. I don't know. Maybe you can't tell that. Maybe you can.
I can tell you from our office, it will be purely anecdotal because we just don't keep facts. If they call about something that we can't do anything about now, I usually end with, okay, you know, if you want us to be able to do something about that, you're going to have to call your councilman.
I see.
Well, could that be monitored like as a little study here while we're working as a committee over the next 3 or 4 weeks?
We can, but we've got people in and out of our office.
Can't somebody just log the calls?
Sorry?
Could someone just log the
We
calls?
can try. We can try to do that, but again, we have people, anybody and everybody in our phone about different things, so we can make an effort to do that. Right now, I'm 2 people short, so that's a challenge. So, any other questions?
Okay.
I think we're at 6:30.
You did good.
Next week, like I said, next week, if we can get through 305, 306, which both have to do with inside the structure, and then chapters 4, 5, and 6 have to do with inside the structure, that will complete an examination of what is in the interior.
One question real quick. Back to the chairperson. Are you going to pull some information together on that?
Yes, I will find out what, because I'm not sure, because the committee was formed by the city council what the rules and expectations are from them as far as how exactly it operates, other than I know that it was open to the public, for them to come in and view. All right, that's all I have. Anybody else have any comments, questions, complaints, or offering to buy dinner?
Move we adjourn.
Oh, right. This is the copies of the presentation that we had tonight to go back.
Sure. Are there minutes? Are there minutes?
Is being recorded, and there are,
We'll have minutes. We have minutes from the next, at the next meeting.
You know, 'cause I don't just want one second. Thank you.
If we could have minutes to help us review next week, that'd be great. I have trouble remembering what I have for breakfast sometimes.
all right, that's all you'll have. I will see y'all next week.
Thanks, Todd.